Hello, I'm Victor and this is The Junkyard. Is the title of this video confusing you? Well, today I am going to be stepping on Greg's toes a little bit, as this is definitely moving into Pop Arena territory. See, after doing my review of the 1944 House of Frankenstein movie, I had vague recollections of a TV movie by the same name, and decided to track it down. I found it easily enough. It was a TV network event movie, 1997's House of Frankenstein. I was 13 when I watched this, and I enjoyed it. It's 13 years later. Let's see how it holds up.
I should begin by pointing out that there hasn't been a DVD release of the movie, so I'm getting everything off of YouTube, courtesy of Mr. Skippable. Please forgive the poor quality and sparseness of the pictures, and thank your lucky stars you live in a time when even decade-old obscure TV movies can be accessed and enjoyed with just a few keystrokes. Humans don't deserve the internet. Anyway, the film takes place in LA, where we follow Vernon, a cop investigating a series of brutal animalistic killings, and Grace, a woman who, after the most pathetic use of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf as lycanthropic foreshadowing I've ever seen, gets attacked by a werewolf. We also meet Grimes, the rich owner of the House of Frankenstein dance club, who is using considerable resources to track down the corpse of the Frankenstein monster. Vernon and Grace meet after she gets attacked, and he questions her. In a funny turn, when she says it was some kind of dog, he acts skeptical. First of all, we saw the wolf attack another guy before her eyes. It was a standard dog mauling, so either the dog-made wounds magically transformed into human-made wounds, or Vernon is an idiot.
Giving the filmmakers more credit than I think they deserve, I think this whole bit was meant to be a sort of reversal on the classic, "It walked like a man! Looks like a wolf bite to me, lass. You have to believe me!" sort of scene, but it didn't work.
Anyway, Grimes does find the creature's body and has it brought back to the States. Their generic European scientist wants to thaw the creature, who we will call Gary. But Grimes wants him kept on ice so he can display the thing in his club. However, scientist finds the temptation too great, possibly because the room just happens to be full of equipment for laser thawing frozen cavemen, and Gary is released.
Just because I can't let this go, do keep in mind that the 1944 movie actually remembered that freezer burn exists.
The next day, a surprisingly relaxed Grimes sends scientists out to find the errant monster and then gets a visit from Vernon, who's following leads. Vernon then has some back and forth with Grace, who's experiencing an increase in energy and heightened senses. Neither of these scenes progress the plot much, but they do help establish the characters. Vernon, the protagonist, is pretty lame, with a tough guy attitude and gravelly voice that couldn't convince a preschooler, but he's at least a functional character. Grace has a bit more personality and manages to convey the inner conflicts of the werewolf curse fairly effectively. Grimes, meanwhile, is a delightfully campy villain, pretty much exactly what I aspire to be.
Speaking of character development, it was this Frankenstein monster that I remember from my original viewing of this movie.
Next to De Niro's take, this version of the creature is possibly the closest I've seen to the original novels. Basically intelligent, yet baffled by some aspects of the human experience, not confrontational, but easy to move to violent action, and not in control of his own strength. We see him, more or less ignored by the jaded populace of a modern city, living off the streets, stealing what he needs. After attempting to steal some boots, he gets chased by the police and taken in by an old man named Armando. The two form a friendship as the old man helps the monster acclimate to the modern world.
Overall, Gary seems to be enjoying the novelty of living in a world where being an ugly SOB isn't enough to bring a lynch mob to your door.
Back to Grimes. After talking with someone who was trying to swindle the obvious villain, we witness him transform into some kind of vampire beast and suck the con man dry. The transformation effect is decent enough for the time and budget, and the costume is imaginative, but the overall design is overdone. We'll get something of a justification for this further on, but considering the werewolves are just trained wolves and Gary just looks like an ashen-faced old guy, the vampires here look out of place. Anyway, Grace is menaced by the werewolf who scratched her, but his reckless behavior forces Grimes, his boss, to have him sent to a farm where he'll have plenty of space to run around.
On a random note, it took me and my sister so long to realize that there's no such thing as a guinea pig farm that it's almost legendary within our family.
As all this is going on, we meet Dr. Kendall, who's trying to convince the police that vampires are behind the killings, with little luck. We also meet Grace's roommate, who gets vamped and will here on out act as a Judas. We catch up with Gary, where he's telling Armando that he doesn't belong and has to get back to the Arctic. Strange, frankly, since he's done pretty well for himself in LA. Armando even takes him shopping, where he gets spotted by scientists who reports back to Grimes. This leads to Grimes breaking into the apartment, offering Gary power, attacking him for his refusal, and killing Armando. Armando, by the way, gets punched straight through the gut without bleeding.
Yet who would have thought the man to have had so little blood in him?
As Gary is taken in by the police, mourning the loss of his friend, Grimes heads off to kidnap Grace from Vernon's sister's house. Did I mention that they're now an item and Vernon took her there to keep her safe? Sorry, forgot. Anyway, she goes wolf, but Grimes still overpowers her and flies off, damsel in claw.
And thus ends part 1. So far, so good as far as I'm concerned. It was an hour and a half, and yet it managed to keep my interest throughout the entire thing. Let's see how the rest holds up.
Grimes has brought Grace to his estate, Vernon is in a state, and Gary is under scrutiny by the state. A psychologist is brought in to see if Gary is crazy, and all he learns is that the guy has no pulse, heartbeat, or blood pressure. The police chief, meanwhile, has succumbed to pressure from the mayor's office and media and declares Gary the killer. Why do these guys never consider what'll happen when the real killer they were too lazy to track down kills again? Anyway, this leads to the inevitable, "You got the wrong man! Hand in your badge" scene with Vernon. Grace wakes up, and Grimes immediately starts in with the creepy staring and the "you're one of us nowing" and locks the confused werewolf in her room. As she tries to think of what to do next, Grimes is planning to get Gary back. When asked why the poor patchwork dope is so important to him, he says he wants to, quote, "see how he can survive eternity."
I guess you could go mad with loneliness, kill some people, and then get frozen for a century. Who goes asking for life advice from the Frankenstein monster? Am I missing something?
Realizing he has to keep the monster out of Grimes' hands, scientist breaks Gary out of the hospital where his pulseless, electricity-soaked body was being analyzed. Grimes finds them and then takes Gary off of the good doctor's hands. And then takes the good doctor's head off the good doctor's shoulders. Vernon, meanwhile, has gone to see Dr. Kendall, who explains that the original vampires were fallen angels, a detail that makes the makeup choice more appropriate, though no less excessive. They can only be killed with a stake and or fire, and they react badly to religious symbols. And now we've got an arsenal for the rest of the movie. All through the second half, we have various scenes of Grimes trying to seduce Grace, both sexually and spiritually. Disturbingly, he only seems to have the hots for her when she's gone canine, though I think the filmmakers meant for that to signify that he was attracted to her power more than her. Meanwhile, he sets a trap for Vernon that ends with Judas' roommate dead and himself impaled on fiberglass unicorn. He survives, though his dignity doesn't. He taunts Gary for a while, and then he sends him out to kill Vernon. In other words, Grimes manages to keep busy. Also great is the part where, to lure him out, Grimes has a vampire threaten Vernon's sister. She manages to do the punk in with her relatives' apparently sacred ashes and a fireplace poker.
Between getting punked by a fire extinguisher, a fake unicorn, and a soccer mom, these vampires are not impressing me.
Gary is taken to Vernon's home with an Igor stand-in ready to keep the creature in line with a shock collar. He realizes what the audience has probably already figured out, that shock collars won't work on people with electricity flowing through their veins in lieu of proper blood, about 1 second after it would do him any good, and 1 second before getting impaled on a tire iron. Anyway, Gary, Vernon, and Kendall join forces and sneak into Grimes' estate. There they have a fracas with Grimes. I'm not going to explain the whole exchange, but the end result is Vernon shooting a wolfed-up Grace with a silver bullet, Kendall getting scratched by said wolf with an excessively loud and obvious bit of Foley, and Gary smashing a stake through Grimes' heart. Gary stays behind to burn the body while Vernon takes Grace, still in wolf form, to the hospital.
There's a funny bit where the physician, gun to his chest, tells Vernon that, "You can't expect me to operate on an animal." You know, most smart people develop a very can-do attitude about requests made at gunpoint.
Vernon has the surgeons let her flatline to get rid of the werewolf curse, and then forces them to revive her. Fortunately, they succeed in saving Grace, because it allowed me to make that crappy pun.
By the way, I don't know, Vernon basically shot and killed his girlfriend to prevent her from becoming a dog once a month. I think all you really needed for this relationship to work was a sturdy cage and an open mind.
Back with Gary, we find that Grimes wasn't quite ready to lay down and pushes him into the fire. As the cops raid Grimes' club, there's a final confrontation which leaves the vampire dead. In the end, we have Vernon and Grace living happily ever after, Gary surviving the fire to go back to the North Pole, presumably muttering about being too old for that shit, and Kendall turning into a werewolf. Meanwhile, some other vampires risen to take Grimes' place as ruler of the city's underworld. This was supposed to seem ominous, but this guy spent the movie trying to get Grimes not to do all the stupid-ass things that got him killed, so I'm okay with this change of leadership. Anyway, there the film ends.
So what did people get for their 4 hours of invested time, including commercials? A pretty solid movie. It was engaging and occasionally even thoughtful. It made good use of its budget. It just had enough of a sense of humor about itself that nothing was really forced. I would go so far as to say that I can appreciate it more now than when I was 13. In any case, this has been Victor with the Junkyard. Thanks for watching and have a good day.
You know, it occurs to me that the first person who makes a book or movie about vampires falling in love with unicorns will leave Stephenie Meyer penniless in the street.